All right. Hi, I'm Garrett Stuckey here with another episode of the Startup 360 podcast, where I sit down with startup founders like Rob Konsdorf here, and I interview them on a 360 camera. So you can grab your VR headset, throw it on, and be a part of this conversation. As always, please subscribe to the channel, like and share with your friends, and you can also reach me at 734-274-9521 or startup360podcast.com. Rob, appreciate you being on the Startup 360 podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Garrett.
Absolutely. Now, you are the CEO and founder of EOS Detroit, and why don't we kind of start with what is EOS Detroit?
Sure. EOS Detroit was hatched in March of 2018 after a long culmination of being a part of startups, being involved in the blockchain ecosystem, and realizing I wanted to bring something fresh to Detroit that could actually help establish a more mature tech ecosystem there, as well as provide financial inclusion through software. So EOS Detroit, we like to say it's a community-focused technology startup that's focused on building positive outcomes, economic resilience in local economies, and what our main business is at this point is being a block producer for these networks such as EOS. So there's a specific type of cryptocurrency or blockchain network based on a type of software called eosio, and we run a few of those networks, actually, EOS being the main one. So we provide services, API endpoints, we run nodes, so it's running servers, it's a DevOps job basically, system engineering. And beyond that, we offer product development services for folks who want to build on EOS or other eosio networks, or even people who just want to start some new software company. Like, we're not going to necessarily turn someone away because they're not using blockchain, because there's definitely it's not for everything.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think has been a pretty popular conversation in the industry lately, actually. So yeah, EOS Detroit is 13 folks right now. We're fully self-funded, bootstrapped using dynamic equity splitting. We're mostly based in Detroit. We have one person in Minneapolis and one person in Thailand right now. And we're very excited to be working together and kind of living our dream. So
cool. Appreciate that. So let's take a few minutes and kind of go pre-EOS. You said there's a lot of things that kind of led up to this. You said you've been in other startups before. Kind of what was, I guess, some of the more interesting points that brought you to starting EOS Detroit?
Great question. So I got my start at a company called ePrize.
Okay.
ePrize is now Hello World, but they're a marketing agency in Southeast Michigan, digital marketing agency, kind of responsible for things like My Coke Rewards, various promotions and loyalties. So I learned my web development chops there from some amazing mentors, and they had that like startup feel, like the culture, it was not super hierarchical, it was kind of fun, like, Nerf guns and things like that. And I realized, wow, like, work doesn't have to be uptight and boring.
Yeah. So
I was very fortunate to be able to be an intern there and get some great experience there. Met one of my co-founders. I was his intern there, Charlie Dumont, who's our CTO right now. And we've been building software together for about a decade now. So through friends in college who are interested in the startup world and looking at these types of opportunities, I just started reading a lot about startups. I found, Hacker News, various resources, and I started ingesting a lot of this information over the years. Eventually, that combined with this whole new blockchain, cryptocurrency world that kind of exploded after Bitcoin was launched in 2009. I think in college we were talking about it in like 2011, 2012. but we weren't really moving on it at all, right? We were just like really interested in it because me and my friends were studying computer science, and we're like, what is this?
Yeah.
So I was exposed in 2011, but didn't really come back around and start participating in these systems until about 2013, 2014. Another one of the folks I went to school with at Kettering in Flint got me into this project called BitShares. He was on the forums. He's like, this is awesome. Like, they're really building something different here. And so that's really fascinating. I joined the BitShares community. I realized I went down the rabbit hole too, learned a lot about economics and markets and all of these different topics on the fly, and just sort of got really interested in it because I saw that there was something fundamental here that could be used to make the world a better place, and like a fairer place and a more transparent place, and just like improve these systems that touch our lives every day. So I became a contributor back then and sort of drifted in and out, continued working in software. My last stint before EOS Detroit was actually Duo Security, a couple blocks away from here. And so, you know, I loved coming out to Ann Arbor. I got this amazing boost of motivation working there, seeing how like a really high functioning, what used to be startup, by the time I joined it was about 200. So it was a medium-sized business. That kept that hacker ethos, that startup feel that we can have fun and we can do really good work together, and like we can respect each other, we can teach each other. And so Duo really inspired me to apply that culture, that type of culture, to this new industry, and also do it in Detroit, where you know the tech ecosystem really isn't as mature as Ann Arbor. So I've always said, you know, Ann Arbor doesn't need me. It's got plenty of people smarter than me, but I think I could make a big impact in Detroit, and it's my home. So I want to build something like they have out there over here.
Cool.
So that's kind of what happened, and it just all mixed together. EOS was launching. So EOS was announced in 2017, like early 2017, probably around May. Launched in June 2018, the main network. So the EOS network. And we were a part of the launch, you know, all the test nets up to launch. So we've been involved since the beginning, basically.
So let's talk a little bit about why you picked EOS. Obviously, there are thousands of projects out there. Some are just junk, but there are other very viable projects. So why EOS?
It's a great question. I'll start right with this man on my shirt, actually, Daniel Larimer. So we decided to make Dan Larimer shirts because this guy's kind of like an amazing software genius who kind of gets a bad rap in the blockchain industry because he's largely been misunderstood. So he's a very fascinating guy, and you know, philosopher and software architect. And what he did was there's a famous quote from Satoshi Nakamoto, the person or group of people or whatever, the anonymous shadowy figure that created Bitcoin, that reads, "If you don't understand it, I don't have time to explain it to you, sorry." I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it's like a famous quote that comes up from bitcointalk.org. And he was talking to Dan, because Dan was challenging his designs and saying, this is never going to be fast enough, we're not going to be able to... He's like, the things I want to build, we can't build in the software architecture. So he went and devised his own consensus algorithm in 2014 called Delegated Proof of Stake, and that was the consensus algorithm for that BitShares project that I mentioned about. So I got involved when Dan was working on the software kind of in the shadows on like this few thousand person forum, and I started realizing like, wow, these people here are inventing cryptography schemes. They're talking about how to invent new economic mechanisms and all this stuff that I had no idea about. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm learning so much from this forum. I like got addicted to it. I haven't been to that forum in a long time because things have evolved. But back then, that was kind of like what got me in, was being exposed to this dude's ideas. And so, yeah, I mean, this kind of speaks to the heart of it. Like this quote of his, "I believe that properly organized social pressures can be far more powerful than any standing army or government bureaucrat." Basically saying if we create the right incentives and we create the right systems around those incentives, we can rebalance wealth distribution, power distribution, we can improve society, we can make things more transparent. Now, if you believe in the Pareto principle, which is sort of a natural law, the 80-20 rule, like no matter what, there's always going to be people who go out there, you know, through sheer force of innovation or spirit, like innovate, create new markets, make a lot of money, and they deserve that. But, you know, the things have kind of gotten out of hand if we just look at how, like, world governments are today, right?
Yeah.
So part of me, like, ideally, I want to see a future where we can actually kind of rein in a lot of that stuff that's out of control and have it more observable, more transparent, more higher assurances, so like people can then hold these societal institutions to task better. And we can't right now because all of the systems are black boxes. We can't look inside how the government works very well. Yep. But if we put them on these new types of systems and we put all these interactions into these new spaces, that just creates a whole new world of opportunity around how we can fundamentally design more secure systems in general. Yeah, and I'm not trying to overthrow the government. You know, like I know that's a lost cause too. And you know, that's just going to get violence and pain for people. But if you can create a parallel choice for people and say, well, here, we're running this experiment over here and it's working pretty well, it just creates, you know, it expands the conversation, I think.
Yeah. So basically, I guess, kind of circling back, you found EOS because you found Dan. And
yep, and there's a problem a project in the middle of that too, which is called Steam.
Yep.
So he launched BitShares 2.0 in 2015, which was a fundamental re-architecture that was like the core code base that EOS eventually transformed into.
Okay.
EOS is kind of like the 3.0 of his stack. BitShares 2.0 is the 2.0 of his stack, and that's when I kind of stopped paying attention. I had to go work a regular job and make money or something, you know. And so the point I was driving at was in BitShares 2.0, he created a worker proposal system, and we were so mind blown by this. The inflation of the system could pay for labor to build on it. So now we have this autonomous software system that can pay for its own labor through its own emission.
Yeah.
And so Dan created that, and he created a proposal, and the community didn't hire him. So then he went and created a new project. He's like, well, dude, I ran out of money, and you guys didn't hire me.
Yeah.
So his own system didn't hire him. So then he pivoted and created Steam, which was an application-specific blockchain for social media. And Steam and Steemit.com, and that's with 2 E's, which is a horrible brand. Steemit.com is still going today, and you can go there and you can see people are earning cryptocurrency in value for sharing their content on this network. So I came back when Steam came out, actually, and I was like mind blown. I was like, whoa, like this is a crazy new funding mechanism. And you know, part of how I got the chance to start EOS Detroit was being early in Steam, you know, and just being a part of this. And what I learned was just joining and being a part, like, it's just values coming back to me for providing value. And it leads to this sort of thought, like, maybe in the future, like, people will just live and kind of do their thing, and money will be sort of a second thought. We won't have to obsess on it so much like we do today. Like, we're all constantly stressed about money. And it's like, maybe in the future, like, you just sort of live your life, and, like, the value comes back around, and, like, we're accounting for things better. And certainly there's a freeloader problem there, but, like, I don't know. I just go down that path of, like, I want to build that future.
Yeah.
I want to help people get there. And that's why we started EOS Detroit.
So let's come back to EOS Detroit. You mentioned a few things. So obviously you are supporting the EOS network, and and then also you mentioned the pie and then meringue, which we talked about off camera, obviously.
Yep,
So
yep.
let's kind of talk about more about what you're doing today and
Sure.
kind of your priorities of those things.
Sure. So, EOS Detroit didn't actually start earning revenue on the EOS network until March of this year.
Oh.
So we were running at a loss for a while. Part of that is just we didn't get voted in.
Yep.
And it's been difficult to reach all of the stakeholders because it's a global community. It's an anonymous community. You don't know who has tokens. You can't do targeted marketing very well.
Mm-hmm.
There's still certain forums for that, but really one of our biggest struggles was a language barrier because it's so big in China and Korea, and we don't know Chinese or Korean, so we've had to find partners and people to kind of help us get our message there, and because they're huge stakeholders. So anywho, the point I was driving at was, because of this situation where we were we need to pivot, we're not making money on this and we're burning all our reserves basically to stay alive.
Mm-hmm.
We started working on other things. We started working on product development, Meringue being one of them. We launched a whole nother blockchain on EOS.io called Telos, which is pretty cool. You can check that out at telosfoundation.io, and earn some Telos tokens in a grant for helping be a part of launching that. So we labored to launch this network, earned some back. That kind of got us into March.
Okay.
Without launching Telos, EOS Detroit would have died. We would have just ran out of money and had to shutter. So it was really fascinating. We had a lot of good breaks. We had a software contract last November that helped us out. And so we were okay, let's lean into that. We're gonna provide consulting services for product development. We're gonna also work on our own product so we can eventually get up our own revenue stream. But for now, and we know Meringue is validated. I'll talk about why in a second. But we know this is a core competency. We can build systems for people. Let's offer that. And so we went out, started prospecting, and we're in the late stages of closing a pretty good deal that will have us building a new application on EOS. They're one of the partners listed on our site called Building Blocks, and they're building a funding platform for neighborhoods. So it's very much in line with our ethos as well. So hopefully that works. I know you shouldn't talk about a deal before it's closed, but
Yeah.
we're pretty tight with them. And they're a great project, so regardless of how things turn out, I really want to see that built. But beyond that, we launched Telos, and we used the precursor to Meringue in order to track all of the contributions of everyone helping launch Telos. So there's 69 contributors in the Telos pie that I managed. And it was this really rudimentary web app that I just threw together by myself really quick, and we alpha tested this sort of process, learned a ton about what doesn't work, what does, and then iterated that into a spec for Meringue, and right now we're building the base software for that.
Gotcha.
But seeing as we're pre-funding and no one on our team gets paid right now, things move a little slower. There's challenges. We're very resilient, but we can't just hire 6 devs and go right now. So it's a little slow going to get this off the ground that way.
Gotcha. So let's talk about Meringue a little bit and how
Sure.
it helped you build Telos, and I want to also ask you
Sure,
about
sure.
that as well. So what is Meringue?
Yeah, so Meringue is dynamic equity management as a service, and really we're inspired by Mike Moyer's slicing pie model, which is well documented. He's got a website. You can buy legal contracts through it and various things, but we weren't satisfied with the software he offers, and I don't know that he is either, but he offers a little management tool. A lot of people do this in spreadsheets too.
Yep.
But what we realized was, on surface, everyone loves the idea of taking equity allocation, kicking it down the road a few years until you see how the dust settles on how the company was bootstrapped. Who showed up, who worked overtime, who put their own money in, all of these factors matter, but traditional static equity splits don't really factor that in. It's typically like we just slice this up and then we don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
And that's got its own advantages, but Meringue, I believe, is more equitable and gives people who aren't great negotiators a chance to earn a fair amount of equity for the risk that they're putting in. And so there's this whole formula. It factors in fair market value, so what are you worth on the market, salary. It factors in cash, it factors in labor. You can do commission structures, all kinds of compensation structures, but instead of allocating cash, you're allocating slices. And slices are continually being allocated as the company works while this model's running. So everyone's being continuously diluted because your total share of the pie is the number of slices you get over the total allocated.
Yeah.
So if you're showing up more, that percentage will grow. If you're showing up less, that percentage will shrink. And then there's ways that the pie gets frozen. So there's special triggers. This is all set up in like a legally binding context. So it's like for us it's 4 consecutive quarters of profitability will freeze the pie. And there's a few other ways, and that can all be customized too. So this is all very configurable for what each business needs. But back to Meringue, so we were like, slicing pie is awesome, we want to use that.
Yep.
We started playing around, how do we even track this well? And then realizing time tracking is horrible, and it's totally not how people who work salary think. So we need to get rid of that. That was the obvious, let's use time tracking, right? No. There's a lot of reasons why, just no. Telos was a great example why. We learned very quickly how much human nature will attempt to game that time tracking system, whether it's inflating my hours or it was very hard to standardize how people think about their time tracking. It was, and way too many reporting points, so many additional places where you can go wrong. So what we decided was, let's just tie it to our agile sprint outcomes, and then we only report for each person once a sprint. And it's sort of like, it's a proxy for the value they're creating, so long as we're planning well and booking work through the sprint well and doing all of that properly. Like, it works pretty well. And now, these project tracking tools and these various tools that people use and organizations use to track this sort of thing, well, they have APIs. So how do we glue this all together, basically? That's where we're at, but we're building, a base app up that we can actually fork for all of our clients. So we're a little bit early on actually having Meringue ready for public consumption, but we anticipate by the end of the year the beta will be live. So, and then any company, any new venture, it can be a band, it can be a handyman service. It doesn't have to be a tech company. It can be anything you want to split ownership of. It can be a blockchain project, a token allocation, or equity allocation, or and then we start talking to people and they're like, well, can I like do budgeting for my company with this thing? And yeah, there's a lot of different ways we can use dynamic pies. So we are looking for feedback, people who want to be involved in the beta. They can email ask@eosiodetroit.io and just request to be put on the list, and when we're ready, we'll send out more information to everyone. So
yeah, I think that's really interesting how because you're right. So when you have multiple founders in a company or people getting equity, not everybody puts in the same hours, the same value, and what you'll hear a lot in startups are, hey, we've got 3 founders and everyone has a 33% share, and now it's like
rookie move.
Yeah, right. That's a big issue, and you'll hear a lot of, I guess, like sage advice say like, no, there needs to be some off balance there, and this seems to do a really good job of doing it fairly. At least
it's automatic if you get the reporting right.
Yep.
So that's where Meringue will solve. Our number one goal is to reduce the reporting burden and increase the accuracy of the model automatically.
Yeah.
Through automation. And there will be special cases, I'm sure, and we'll uncover ways we can improve it as we go, as people start using it. But yeah, it just kicks all of that consideration, and then, you know, what happens is founders will be like, this is effed up. We're going back to the table and renegotiating. And that happens. So now you've got more stress, more tension, like having to have the hard conversation over and over and over again while the thing's being created.
Yeah.
It's like, nah, let's just, the pie will provide.
Yes, yeah, and that's, that risk of a company blowing up because founders can't agree on equity when somebody doesn't do what they were supposed to be doing all along.
It's very frustrating.
So
another point I wanted to make about while we're talking about the pie, and it's an important part I didn't touch on. So there's an allocation framework, which I've described. There's also a recovery framework. And it's really nice how this sort of works. Like in the slicing pie model, basically the individuals in the startup are protected and the company's protected based on who's at fault for whatever, bad breakup or whatever.
Yep.
Like, employee decides to leave with a 2-day notice and they're on like the most critical part of the company. Well, you're kind of putting us in a hard spot.
Yep.
So there's like there's ways you can call back some slices. There's ways that there's actually multipliers. There's a risk multiplier on labor and cash. So, for instance, if the individual wasn't at fault and the company is kind of like laying them off out of nowhere or something, you know, there wasn't enough notice, and that's all kind of defined. I won't get into the details about that, but there is that multiplier of 2x on labor. So what this does is it accounts for the risk of the founder being a part of a startup. So if you're a founder and your company kind of squeezes you out in a messed up way or something, basically your risk multiplier will, this recovery framework will kick in, and the company has to pay a premium back for those slices if they want to buy back. At your discretion, you can hold the slices too. So it's a way where like that the person who kind of got the short end of the stick would be paid a premium if they allowed their slices to be bought back to account for the risk of being a part of it. So I love like risk is in the model, which is so important. That's like really what we're bringing to the table as startup founders, like defining this thing out of nothing and taking a lot of risk on to do that. So really love that part of it.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting part because there are so many moving pieces in a startup, and that's a really big problem. Is hey, like I got booted out because 2/3 of the company said I'm out. And that's
and are they clawing back? Do you get anything? I hope so.
Yeah.
No one should be valued at zero.
Correct.
The company made the decision to hire them. They may not have worked out, but they should still walk away with something, I think. There's all kinds of horror stories there. Don't have to get too deep into it, because then we'll all have a rain cloud over us today on this beautiful day.
I know. Yeah,
no, I'm just kidding, but you know how it is.
Absolutely. So, alright, so we're aiming to launch in the end of this year with the beta. And obviously we're looking for companies and startups that are interested in employing this model. Give your email and things like that. What is like the revenue generation model for this? Because obviously for EOS Detroit, there's quite a few different ways that you're making money. So one is on the EOS network, another is you're developing for other companies, and then Meringue, is that just are we just going like straight SaaS?
Straight SaaS, yeah. Okay. So we haven't figured out the unit economics yet, but essentially probably a small fee per user per pie per month.
Okay.
Type of thing.
Yeah.
And then, we want to make sure users can be in multiple pies too, so allowing, because if you're using it for your side project, but you're also using it in the startup that you work for your day job, but you're also want to use it for your band, you should be able to have multiple pies. So we kind of really want to make it user-centric. There will be an organizational layer as well, and you know, admin functionality, and like a light approval processes for managers. So like we can scale approval across the org too. Like, oh, as the manager of this subgroup in the company, like you are responsible for kind of overseeing these 3 or 4. And so creating like a light system for kind of like appeals, approvals, denials, that kind of thing, so we can make sure there's good controls to keep the data clean, because you know, especially at first, it's possible there will just be weird things that happen because it's a new piece of software. But yeah, so straight SaaS, you know, something like that per user, per pie per month, or maybe unlimited pies and a flat rate. Like, we don't really know totally yet, and I think we're gonna need to we're gonna kind of have to gauge the market and see what this is valued at. You know, I kind of dream in the future we could compete with existing unicorns like Carta. So we do want to go big with Meringue. I think that there's something here that these other cap management softwares are missing.
Gotcha.
So yeah, we'll see how it shakes out. But yeah, and as far as like the product development goes, you know, we really like to be careful about who we partner with and make sure we believe in the viability, because we know like building something that you feel fundamentally won't work means you're not going to do a good job regardless. So because of that, we're also willing to take some sort of equity partnership with the companies we're consulting with. So if they're like, well, you know, we need to save some money, like, pay us 20% in equity. We want to be bought in and have skin in the game for what you're building and your dreams too. If we believe in you, we should also be willing to throw down and have skin in the game too. So really big on skin in the game across all of this.
I think that's a great model, because it's for everybody. One is obviously the founder. It allows them to bootstrap longer. You know, that having that runway is crucial for any startup, which obviously you know. And then 2, for you in EOS Detroit, is like, if this company does turn into something that's much larger, you know, that's a great investment, and it really helps with your funding.
Yeah, totally.
And yeah, so I think if you can work those kinds of deals out, I say, you know, do it. You know, and it sounds like you're getting paid still, so you're not like, you're not working for free necessarily, but at the same time, it's at a discount.
It's really beautiful right now. Like, we're able to invest in operational growth outside of labor, and that's really, we do a stipend situation for on a need basis kind of thing, and that gets factored into the model too, so it all kind of works out as fair. But it's really, one thing I noticed, and this would be some advice for startup founders listening, and this is an obvious one, right, is like, really think about how much you can bring in and what that number is to payroll your team, because getting there sooner than later is better. Like, you can abuse the slicing pie model like we have, but it creates new interesting challenges. We have to do dynamic availability, which means we don't have as much assurance about month over month how much everyone can show up on the team, simply because everyone has to go work a side hustle too, or freelance or whatever, in order to make enough to cover their bills. Thankfully, a lot of us live pretty modestly. You know, we have good rent in Detroit and things like that, so we can bring our costs down across the founding team, but it's still, you know, I can't wait for the day that I can begin to give everyone on the team a wage. You know,
absolutely.
It's so important. So don't over-optimize with the slicing pie model. It's really helpful bootstrapping, but also figuring out how you can maybe strike the middle, like, we're going to use this and we're going to pay out some cash kind of thing is really helpful.
Well, too, as a founder, you know, the more equity that you can keep in the long run is better for you, right? It's
Definitely.
always, like you said, it's a balance of, okay, the more equity I give away now, yeah, I'm getting more help, buy-in, things like that, but if I build a unicorn, like, oh, well, shoot, now I don't have nearly as much as I could have had I pushed out some cash.
It's that spectrum of risk, man.
Yep.
Yeah, agreed. And that's part of the reason why we're like, well, we made it this far, because we had an angel lined up, but we realized that he was a speculator. So as the cryptocurrency markets did this last year, he was like, I'm out.
Gotcha.
So, like, you know, while the markets were high, we had him like, okay, we'll get the paperwork done, da 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 da, and like moving it along, and then all of a sudden, like, lawyers took too long, and then this guy's like, I'm scared, basically.
Yeah.
So we were like, oh crap, like that was our plan to kind of get cash in, like de-risk all of this, kind of do it what you would expect, like bring in a small seed round, use that to get to the next level, and that didn't work for us. So we had to get creative. And, you know, I'm just amazed that our team was able to rally around, stick together through these hard times, and now we're on the other side of that gauntlet. There's more gauntlets to traverse, but I guess the point being, the point I was driving at with that was, if you get to this weird situation we're in, where it's like, well, we're not really fully stable, but we've got something. Delay taking investment as long as you possibly can. They'll come to you. And because when people want to start up, they're like, I gotta go get an investment, like, immediately. And I did the same thing. But then I realized, like, well, yeah, I gotta eat ramen noodles and or whatever. But now we're in this weird space where it may be possible to get where, rather than spending, it costs so much time to bring in investment, talking and meeting and waiting and all of this. It's like, well, let's just keep doing this and wait and see if someone comes to us. Gotcha. Or, you know, by the time we're like really ready, we have way more to show for. We've got our MVP for Meringue. We've got this revenue stream that's increased over time. We've shown we can hold that down, because it's possible to be fired at any moment. The votes in EOS can be changed instantly all the time. So it's a constant. It's like an infinite race. Like, we could stop getting paid tomorrow potentially. Yep. That's scary. Like, it's hard to build a foundation on that. So we know, just like we're dedicated to being a block producer and doing these duties and being a custodian for these networks, but we have to have a hedge. Have to have another product or business line.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Now you had this angel investor, you know, crypto market, you know, tanked pretty hard, and do you think his money was tied up in crypto? So he's like, hey, I've got all these Bitcoin at 20 grand, and like, sweet, now now it's at $4,000, and I can't sell it now.
Well, I will say that he's a pretty successful business owner. I think a lot of it's probably tied up in his product. He's got capital, like, in a warehouse, you know,
Gotcha.
Products basically. I don't really know about the details of that, but I know he had pretty damn good exposure to that, and so he probably felt the pain of the market coming down, because that was I think for most it was like between 85 and 90% drawdown from the top.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've ever experienced that in a year. It's
I have.
Sounds like you have, yeah.
Yeah,
but,
so that's I will break even at some point.
Well, maybe this week. I mean, looking at the price action, Bitcoin's above 13K today.
Yeah, no, I saw that.
That's wild.
And I think part of my issue is it's the trading. I think had I just purchased and held, then I would be ahead today. So
that's a great lesson, man. I mean, BitShares, starting back then on this, I've seen these cycles a few times, so I eventually wisened up, but had this like gut-wrenching, like, oh, I can't believe I did that kind of trade, and then eventually realized, like, oh, just don't trade.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. So anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
So in terms of funding, it sounds like you are open to somebody potentially producing an offer to
Mhm.
fund, but you're also not actively seeking it necessarily because you have enough revenue coming in now where you can continue the bootstrap game, and obviously, like you mentioned, keeping that equity as long as possible enables you to negotiate better and keep more within the founding group, which
Mhm.
is a huge thing.
We want to make sure we're ready for the funding too. So there's, I'm starting to be more of a perfection about it.
Mhm.
Like, I don't want to show them yet. No. But we're doing a lot of things like producing a team handbook, like producing like internal core business stuff, and it's like we can kind of have this nice and buttoned up so that when the investors come, they're just like wowed. Like,
Yeah.
there's always going to be something we can improve, and I'm sure
Yeah.
advice they can give us back. But right now we're still cleaning house a bit. We're still getting things in the right order and producing something that is even more investable than maybe it is today.
Yeah.
And so we're a holdout. It's just like real estate.
Yeah.
Hold out, we're just like, well, we can hold out now.
Yeah.
Let's see how long we can last.
Yeah.
Hopefully the whole market structure doesn't change and make us irrelevant.
No, I mean
That's the risk too. Like
it
if
is.
you can get a decent funding, or if you can get a decent offer on investment, and really for us, I think the most important thing for me is knowing that they are down for the cause of
Mhm.
what our vision is, what we're building, why we're doing this, not just speculating.
Yeah.
And also that they have some sort of network that we can leverage, or really good advice, business advice, like they'd make a good board member.
Yeah.
So, beyond just bringing in the capital, I'm really glad we didn't take the $500K,
Yeah.
because now I feel like I could manage that way better.
Gotcha.
I've never managed that much funds.
Yeah.
But now it's like, being so gritty and scrappy for a year, it's like I think we'd be really frugal with a raise, and we'd spend it well, because
Gotcha.
we've been forced to get by with so little.
Mhm.
That's another thing. Like, if you get a big lump of investment money early, like you really probably want to think a lot about how you're going to spend that money before it comes in. We had a general idea, but it was still not
Not that
probably where it should have been at that point.
Gotcha.
I guess just don't rush it. And if
Mhm.
you get a great deal and you really vibe with the investor, then go for it.
Sweet. So we're getting close to the end of the time here. So before we hit the rapid fire, give me the 30-second synopsis on Telos, because we never finished talking about that.
Sure.
And
So
then we're gonna hit rapid fire.
so Telos, it was actually, I believe it was the second public fork of the EOS.io reference implementation. So I didn't mention another company that I'll bring in right now.
Okay.
Block One.
Yep.
They're the core development company for the EOS.io protocol. Dan Larimer is the CTO of that company.
Gotcha.
They raised $4 billion in their ICO selling EOS tokens. This was the largest raise ever in history. They had billions on the books in a year.
Yeah.
Never happened. Took Facebook 7 years to get $1 billion, right?
Yeah.
So we're in this weird new unprecedented realm with Block One, as like it came up so fast and has so many assets so fast. They're spending it to develop the protocol. And the way it was launched, as I mentioned earlier, was sort of launch this reference implementation, let people fork it into different networks. So Telos was a fork of that. That's kind of like more Western oriented at this point. They implemented a fully formed governance system. So Telos has arbitration and dispute resolution on chain. They changed the distribution to minimize the influence of whales or large holders in EOS, so everyone got cleaved to a maximum of 40,000 tokens, and they burn the rest, so the Telos supply is much lower than EOS. And as a result, they didn't get a ton of support from the people who they burned their shares in EOS, basically. But they didn't burn the EOS shares, they burned the Telos shares, so they used the same Genesis block or snapshot, which is the sort of state that the chain starts with, and then modified it to do this 40,000 token cleave in order to try to make a more distributed governance. What ended up happening was a lot of the founding groups ended up becoming the whales because we did this token distribution for the founding groups. So it kind of shifted the problem around a bit. Like Telos is still doing a lot of great stuff. It's got its own community around it. The EOS community still has more capital. It still has more weight behind it, more apps development on it. But I kind of think it's awesome that like something like Telos can exist, can come from nothing and become something. And so they're going after their own markets. You know, they're focusing on enterprise and like. It's just, you know, there's this whole different set of stakeholders that are trying to build on the same platform or same core technology as EOS, but they've tweaked the governance. So EOS and Telos have a governing document, and part of the functionality. So we have smart contracts, which are programs on these open state databases, and then we've got Ricardian contracts, which are like prose, like readable. This looks like a contract, and you can implement basically Ricardian contracts that map to smart contracts that clarify the intention of each function. And this is how you do arbitration and dispute resolution on a blockchain, because then arbitrators that are elected on chain as a role can actually look at the intention through these Ricardian contracts and see what everyone was opting into, and then clarify a situation or whatever, a transaction. So Telos is sort of focused on those, and there's a bunch of other chains. Like there's one called Boss that's more Eastern focused. So it's like Telos is the Western chain, Boss is the Eastern chain. There's some side chains that are trying to plug in. There's another one we provide infrastructure for called Warbly. That's actually a permission chain. So the validators, the block producers are whitelisted, and they're focused on providing full compliance at the protocol level with like traditional requirements, so AML and KYC. So every account on Warbly will be identified, and this is to make it easy for traditional businesses to build applications here and still be legally compliant in their jurisdictions. So there's like all these different flavors kind of spinning out. It's becoming very fractal in nature and like hard to keep track of all of them.
Cool. So, all right, we're gonna hit the rapid fire questions here. So, thank you for that.
Thank you.
My first question is, what is your best habit?
I'd say my best habit is probably letting my body, like I listen to my body. Like I don't wake up at the same time every day. I wake up when I wake up.
Gotcha.
Unless I have a meeting to be to, you know, but I typically don't set my alarm. I try to go for walks. You know, I try to listen to my body. I wouldn't say I'm the most in shape or anything, but I really can